we will scrap the Conservatives' paper and replace it with a fresh negotiating priorities, with a strong emphasis on the single market and putting the economy first. Colleagues on my benches, that is the manifesto that you stood on only a few months ago, that we would scrap this paper, that we would scrap this bill and we would send it back. Tonight, colleagues, on my side, those of you who are thinking about voting with the government, I beg you, you stood only a few months ago on scrapping this paper. Please stand with what you stood for in the manifesto. Colleagues on the other side, there are some of you that, like ostriches, would like to shove your head in the sand and want Brexit under any terms. But you are a minority. The majority of you, I do believe, genuinely want a decent bill that will aid the transition between being in the European Union and being out of the European Union. Now, I'm a Remainer, and I would love, just like most of my constituents would love, to remain in the European Union, and we will make that case. But I'm also a Democrat. But a Democrat is not just about handing all powers to the executive and the government. It is about holding them to account each step of the way. I have listened to lots of the arguments on both sides of the House about how this bill could be improved. And there is a strategy, a very legitimate strategy, that says let's pass it tonight and let's amend it in committee stage. However, why I would say that is an incorrect strategy would be because I think the flaws in this bill are so fundamental, are so huge, that in fact you would be fiddling with the deck chairs on a sinking ship. And unfortunately, what we must do is send this bill back. Now, I will outline in the time that I've got back a few areas where I think fundamentally this bill fails to live up to decent democratic processes and restricts the rights of our people. It removes the Charter of Fundamental Rights from UK law. Now, let's be very clear, that Charter at the moment provides digital rights, it provides asylum rights, it provides pension rights for LGBT people, it provides safeguards for maternity rights, and at the moment there are processes to ensure that that Charter will make sure that a gay couple who have a gay marriage here in the UK are recognised elsewhere in Europe. Removing that... yes, I will give way.
Talks about the fundamental Charter of Human Rights. What is wrong with our Supreme Court, one of the most respected judicial systems in the world, providing those very same rights?
There's nothing wrong with our Supreme Court, but what better to have also another protection additionally to it? So, I think that's a ridiculous argument. The next thing is about safeguards for the current SIs. Much of EU law has been brought in currently as statutory instruments, and with the transformation, what would happen is those statutory instruments are underpinned by EU law, including the ability to fine governments when they overstep those statutory instruments. The removal of the EU oversight, but the continuation of them as statutory instruments means that they will be weak to amendment. They will be weak to amendment through the negative procedure, and this puts rights like to-pay and the transfer of undertakings and working time directives at risk. It does put them at risk, and therefore, clearly what should happen is those statutory instruments should have an additional statutory underpinning that they cannot be removed from using the negative process.
Will my honourable friend...
I will do.
Does my honourable friend agree that we should not be trusting the party that refused to implement the social chapter at all with all of our rights at work that come from Europe?
Order. Just before I call Mr Russell-Moyle, I would just point out that our remaining speakers who want to make a contribution, every intervention is mucking up their chances. Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
I agree. The bill also... I want to move on quickly. Mr Speaker, the bill also fails to actually completely mention or touch on how some of the soft law mechanisms will be brought in to the UK framework, such as the open method of coordination. It doesn't even mention that area of EU coordination that clearly we will want to adopt significant parts of, but it completely is quiet on it. It is, of course, there is need to give ministers certain powers. But even in the Second World War and the emergency powers that were given, there were not powers for ministers to spend unfettered amounts. This bill gives the power for ministers to spend unfettered amounts. It is a bill that gives ministers unheard of powers. It is not a democratic bill. It cannot be classed as bringing power back to this country or to this Parliament. Now, clearly, what we need to do tonight is vote against this bill, send it back and get the government to give us a decent bill that will preserve our democratic rights for our people and for our Parliament.